Also co-sponsored by the Capitalism Party and Young America's Foundation. Our speaker, John Stossel, graduated from Princeton as a psychology major in 1969. Throughout his career as a journalist, Mr. Stossel has received numerous honors, including 19 Emmy Awards, and has been honored 5 times by the National Press Club. He has also written 3 books, titled Give Me a Break, Myths, Lies, and Downright Stupidity, and No, They Can't, Why Government Fails, but Individuals Succeed. He is currently the host of the weekly show Stossel on Fox Business. And most of all, he is a staunch champion of the free market. The topic of his talk today is capitalism and its enemies. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure and honor of presenting to you John Stossel.
Thank you, Andy. As I listen to him, I can't tell if the audio is better if I just talk without the reverb, or is this better? No response from this group. Come on. Is it clear? Because sitting over there, I'm struggling. All right, so I just want to talk a little bit about what I've learned since I was a student here, and then take questions from you. I graduated in '69. This is the only picture I could find because my friend sent it to me that a couple of them aren't in the picture, are around here. Now I've lost them. But at the time, I didn't know anything. And it makes me want to ask you, how many of you students here know what you want to do with your life? How many of you plan to be a lawyer? Few. Science? A few. When I was this age, I was so anxious because my friends who knew, I felt were so ahead of me. And I just wanted to make the point that by not having a clue, I ended up in a profession where basically it was just being invented. Nobody intended to go into it, and it worked out pretty well. So I just want to say that don't worry if you don't know, because life is changing so fast now. If you pay attention and are on the balls of your feet, good things tend to happen. Now this is the Libertarian Organization. I certainly didn't know what that meant when I was at Princeton. I was taught here at the time that good garden variety liberalism, that it's the beginning of the war on poverty. Johnson said this is an outrage in this rich country. Some people are still poor. We know what works. We're going to have some programs, and we're going to fix it. And that just made sense to me. I was charged up with that. I hated school. I was so bored sitting in this room listening to some famous professor drone on without any pictures that I thought, well, the way to get ahead is to go to grad school. I applied to the University of Chicago School of Hospital Administration. I got in, I deferred acceptance to take a job, and I came to every job interview that came to Princeton, and got several offers, and took the one that offered the longest free trip, which was to Portland, Oregon. And it was to work as a circulation manager in a magazine which went bankrupt before I got out there, so they said, you want to work in our TV newsroom? Okay. I never even watched TV news, really. I didn't know anything about it. I never wrote anything for the school newspaper. And what the heck? I tried it out. And it turned out to be just much more interesting than school, in that you don't feel guilty for not having done all the work all the time. At 6 or 7, you go home and your conscience is clear. And they pay you. It seems so much better. So I kept working and kept deferring graduate school. And because I'm a stutterer, so obviously I've largely gotten it under control. Because I'm a stutterer, at some point they wanted me to go on the air, and I reluctantly agreed, cover stories myself. I didn't want to do what everybody else was doing and have to compete with the other people at press conferences where I might humiliate myself trying to call out a question. So at the time, if you think about it, what the media covered was politics, crime, and the weather. That was about it. So I helped invent this new form of reporting called consumer reporting. That is in science and business. And I approached it with the Princeton liberal attitude, which is that well, capitalism is okay, brings us some stuff, but it's by and large cruel and unfair, and we need regulation, government, lawsuits to protect us from business. And there were infinite examples. Andy mentioned I won 19 Emmy Awards doing these stories. And some were silly, but the Coffee Association was running ads saying, coffee is the drink that picks you up, well, it calms you down. So we called them up and said, how can you say this? It's contradictory. Well, we have research to back this up. Really, what's the research? Well, we surveyed thousands of people. We asked them, when you get out of your coffee break? Some people said it picked them up, some people said it calmed them down. There were just endless scams, and so it's intuitive to people that we need some experts to tell us how not to get ripped off. That we're busy, we have lives, we can't pay attention to everything. Hey, I went to Princeton, but I can't get my brain around how you design a sewage treatment plant. So we want experts, and it's just natural to think that the ones who went to Harvard, say, would be better at telling us how to change a light bulb. And that makes sense to people. It's central planning, that's why the Soviet Union failed, but it still makes sense to people. It's logical that life would work better that way. Maybe this is because when we're little kids, our parents plan our lives. Or from evolution. Our ancestors lived in clans of 100 people, and if you didn't harvest the fruit when the tribal elders said you should, you died and didn't give birth to us. Whatever the reason is, we're comfortable with an expert making decisions for us. But then I watched the regulators work. And I was unusual that I stayed on the beat because I was afraid of my stuttering. And so I saw the regulation fail. I didn't just call for it. Sometimes I got laws passed when I was reporting and then move on. I saw that the problem continued. Why is this? And Hayek has explained it much better since then, but I knew that there's just too much information out there in the brains of 300 million people for the central planners ever to know how to guide that. But what I saw is that the problem didn't go away. The people selling the penis enlargers and the burn family asleep pills kept getting away with it. 40 years later, they're still getting away with it. What would happen is maybe 5 years into the scam, the Attorney General would wake up and notice the scam and file suit. And then the crook would hire a defense lawyer and use our slow legal system to hold the regulators off another 5 years. And then they would sign a consent order, which meant you say, I don't admit doing anything wrong, but I won't do it again. So, and then they would move to a different state, do the same thing, or change the name of the product. It didn't make it better. By contrast, just the burden of all the lawyering and the regulation made everything a little worse. It costs a fortune. The least of it is the money spent to pay the bureaucrats. The bigger cost is the energy and money, the creative energy lost just trying to figure out the system. You got some of your smartest classmates here, they're going to law school rather than physics or engineering. Because law school is where the action is. But physics and engineering, that's what makes our lives better. All this energy going into gaming the system. If you're in business, lobbying, forming trade associations, it costs a fortune, it stifles growth, stifles innovation, it sucks the life out of a free economy, and we kept doing more of it. I think it's the reason this recovery was so slow after the recession, because there are so many rules. I once tried to open a lemonade stand. Whoops, I won all these Emmys doing these reports before I left. I once tried to open a lemonade stand outside my offices in New York, and I couldn't do it legally in under 60 days. The Fox lawyers finally let me do the story on it. They said, you can't let anyone drink the lemonade, so I have to sell them the lemonade and then knock it out of their hands and give them their money back. you had to get a government-approved fire extinguisher, pass a health department course, take a health department test, fill out all these forms, get them notarized, all these pointless rules to sell a vape or to do anything else. It doesn't protect us. It just slows life down. But what's the alternative? No rules? Well, yeah. I should have paid more attention in Burt Malkiel's econ class. The invisible hand does work, but it's hard to explain that to people. It's invisible for one thing. Hayek's line's better. It's spontaneous order. That most of life comes out of spontaneous order. But that's not intuitive. If you've never seen a skating rink, and I told you that I'm a greedy businessman, you're the regulators, I want to have this business where I'm going to charge people money, and they're going to come into my rink and strap sharp blades to their feet and zip around on the ice, young and old, some skilled, unskilled, fast, slower. The only rule, go counterclockwise. Your instinct would be to say, no, you can't have that. You got to have skating police or skating stoplights or something. And yet the skating rink works. It's spontaneous. The regulator can't know what all these people are going to do next. When we self-regulate, uninhibited, freely, that's what works best. But it's not intuitive. Now when I say this, people say, all right, well maybe free markets, capitalism, it works well for skating rink, movies, music, clothing, simple things, but much of life is too complex. You need planners for that. Education, for example. Let's skip Princeton, take K-12 education. Parents don't know what the curriculum should be. They don't know who the good teachers are. Instinct says you gotta have central planning for that. But it's not the case. Because not everybody has to be an expert for markets to work their way. As an example, think about cars. Do you understand why one car works better than another or is safer than another? I sure do. But compare the worst car you could buy here in Princeton with the best that the planned economists could produce. And for you younger people, this was the famous car of the Soviet bloc. It was a 5-year waiting list for it. It's called the Trabant. It was a terrible car. You had to put the oil and gas in separately and shake the car and mix them together. It's hard to drive, polluted a lot. And yet, there was a 5-year waiting list for it. When the Berlin Wall went down, it disappeared. Why? I mean, why couldn't it compete with mediocre stuff being sold in New Jersey? Because not everybody has to be an expert for the market to work its magic. You just need a few people, a few car buffs, a few people to read the car magazines. And word spreads. The good companies thrive, the bad ones atrophy. That's all we need. The free market would protect us everywhere. Healthcare, education, just about everything. But we don't trust it. Sometimes people say, okay, I can go along with that, but clearly when it comes to safety, then you gotta get government. Because the factory owner doesn't give a damn if he has horrible working conditions and workers are injured, so we need some basic protections. And shortly after I graduated, they passed that. OSHA, it's called Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They had a rule book of some basic things every manufacturing plant had to have to make it safer. That just seemed reasonable to me. Of course, government always grows, and now the rule book would stretch from the floor, maybe not to this ceiling, but it's big enough that even the OSHA lawyers who specialize in this can't agree on what the rules mean. And it doesn't make it safe. And the head of OSHA under Bill Clinton was fond of showing this chart that shows how workplace deaths did drop since OSHA passed. And injuries, I assume, dropped along the same slope. And you could say, boy, that's really good. Isn't regulation great? Thank God for government. Except some researchers then went to before OSHA and charted workplace deaths then and discovered this. Government's like somebody who jumps in front of a parade and says, see, I led the parade. getting better on their own. That just happens in a free society. When the accident happens, people make adjustments to prevent it from happening again. They're not stupid. As we get wealthier, we care more about safety, pay more attention to it. Even the most venal factory owner cares, if only because it's expensive to retrain workers to replace the ones whom he kills. So, no matter what you think of business, the natural forces on their own save lives. We don't need government to do that. The same applied to the war on poverty that I was so impressed with when I was at Princeton. Here's a graph of the poverty rate. You could see when the war on poverty began, the poverty rate went down. But you look at the rate before the war on poverty, it was already dropping. Americans were lifting themselves out of poverty on their own before government stepped in with welfare. And then after 7, 10 years of dramatic improvement, progress stopped because all these government programs have unintended side effects. In this case, we taught people to be dependent. We taught poor people, don't get married. If the husband is there when the caseworker shows up, you're going to get less money or no money. Get the husband, get the father out of the house. We perpetuated poverty with these well-intended programs, not to mention spending since then about $18 trillion. It doesn't work, but it grows. Government always grows. Here's a rough way to calculate the growth of government since the beginning of America. How big should government be? Politicians don't ask it this way, but I think they should. But what percentage of the economy should government be? 5%? I would say 2%? 10%? We're now at around 40%. And for most of the history of America, when we grew the most, government was 5% or less. The first blip in the line is World War I. The second blip is World War II. Clearly, you got to spend more during the war. The nice thing was it came back down after the war. But that's the last time that's happened. Then came Johnson's war on poverty, Nixon's big spending, Bush's big increases in spending. It seems to drop at the end, but that's only because the peak was the stimulus blowout, which was $1 trillion of supposedly temporary spending. But the trend is only up. And I don't know how you young people are going to fund what's been promised now. My generation, Rich Ryan, Jim Floyd over there, are expecting to have Medicare and Social Security pay for us in our old age, and we rudely refuse to die. When Social Security passed, most people didn't even live to age 65. Now we're living to 78. Princeton grads probably live longer. It can't be paid for. People say, oh, I paid into Medicare all those years. Well, first of all, government didn't put it in the trust fund. They spent it that year. Second of all, we get back 2 to 3 times what we paid in. I'm a Medicare now. When I go to the doctor, nobody even discusses money. You need this test. You go, you get the test. Maybe later you get a bill where you pay attention to it, but it's unsustainable. And yet, they keep spending more. So, the alternative is the market. And I'm not saying it's perfect. There will always be some scams, some Bernie Madoffs, some bubbles. But it's just better than anything else. It brings us, well, it won't take care of everything. And some libertarians would argue it does, but I think that's anarchy. You need government, you need rule of law. I would argue you need cops, you need national defense, and pollution control rules. The founders didn't think of that. But it's hard to solve that through private action. So we need 2% government. And it brings me to the question of how come we're doing pretty well in this country? For a show, I once asked a large high school in New Jersey, a big auditorium filled with high school students, why is America prosperous? And life sucks for most people on Earth. 7 billion people, 2 billion live on $1 or $2 a day, terrible lives. fewer than 1 billion of anywhere near our level of wealth and comfort. How come we're doing so well? Silence. And then one kid says, it's democracy. We invented democracy. They don't know about the Greeks. And then another kid says, it's because we're a relatively new country and we have all these natural resources. Democracy and natural resources are good, but then I can point out that, well, India has both, and India's poor. They say, well, India's overpopulated, that's why India's poor. But actually, the population density of India and New Jersey are the same. And New Jersey goes okay. So, why does America do better than India? Why does Hong Kong do so well? Hong Kong has no natural resources, just a rock, and no democracy. Not for years, not ever. They had the British rulers and then the communist China. But they had something special. They had the ingredients of prosperity. They had two things. Rule of law is one, and economic freedom. Now, rule of law, as I said, it's important. You gotta have some government, keep the peace. The worst places to live, the African country where everyone's afraid to build a factory because you don't know that your neighbor won't steal what you make, or that the dictator won't take your whole factory. So nobody builds, everybody stays poor. You need rule of law. But then economic freedom is the key, because in Hong Kong, what they had was the British, who punished people who robbed or killed one another. But then they sat around and drank tea. They left free people alone, and free people left alone made themselves rich. This worked in Australia, the beginning of America, New Zealand, Singapore, many places that have tried it. It works. We know what works. But we don't do it because the political class, and most people who go into journalism or politics, don't believe it. It's not in their hearts. They just don't get it. Part of that formula is that you can start a business. And as I mentioned in America, you could do it, though it's hard. I couldn't do this in 2 months. In Delaware, I could have gotten permission in about 10 days. Nevada, also. Other states, it takes much longer. In Hong Kong, I got permission in 1 day. Cost $25. In India, I didn't even try. At the time, you had to get a dozen permits just to buy a computer. India had taken the British civil service rules and just worshipped them, increased them. I have a million, you can't try stuff. India stays poor, that's why. So this changed. I finally learned about this. I was ignorant at Princeton, but now through life experience, I see what works. I'm a born-again free marketeer. I'm going to change my reporting, and that changed people's attitude toward being journalists. I stopped winning Emmy Awards. My reporting was no longer good. I sort of was getting funny looks in the hallways. Something's wrong with him. He must be a conservative. But I'm not conservative. Conservative in the media is like being a child molester. It's the worst thing you can do. I became a libertarian. I think drugs should be legal. I think homosexuality is just fine. I'm against going into all these countries and trying to build democracy. I'm a libertarian. I would have thought the liberals with whom I worked would be sympathetic. But they were not. There was all of a sudden hostility. Somebody came up to me on the street in New York and said, "Are you John Stossel?" "Yes." "I hope you die soon." He turned out to be a legal aid lawyer. So I'm trying to figure out, why are you so unhappy with me? He's trying to help the poor. Free markets help the poor more than anything else. What free markets are about are poor people. 1 billion got lifted out of the mud and misery of poverty because of markets in the last 200 years. That's done much more than all the governments of the world. We should celebrate markets, but they don't like them. I'm trying to get my brain around what's this hatred about? And is it envy? And the wealth disparity that goes with freedom makes us uncomfortable. That's true. And I thought maybe it's because these people learn about life through college professors who are all angry that they're slightly stupid a roommate who went into business makes more than they do. So they're jealous and they pass on the same. And the wealth disparity, as I said, is a problem. And then I thought about old Europe and the kings and queens of old Europe, and people didn't hate them. They had a zillion times more money than the average peasant, yet they were revered. But people hated the bourgeoisie. They hated the very people who sold them stuff that made their life better. What's that about? And come to think, it's because without a real economic education, it's easy to think of profit as something that comes at your expense. That if somebody made a profit, he must have made it off you. This is pie, and Bill Gates takes a big chunk, so we have less. And I can see why politicians think that way, because their world works that way. Somebody wins, somebody else must lose. But business doesn't work that way because it's voluntary. Only two ways to do things in life, right? Forced or voluntary. Means and force, we need a rule of law. But voluntary is better. That's the best of life. And by saying business is voluntary, what this means is that no business transaction ever happens unless both parties win, or at least think they win. And you see it every time you buy anything. You buy a cup of coffee this morning. You gave her the buck, she gave you the coffee, and there's this weird double thank you moment. Thank you, thank you. When do you both say thank you? Because you wanted the coffee more than you wanted the buck. She wanted the buck more than she wanted the coffee. You both win, or it doesn't happen. What this means is that Bill Gates didn't take a big piece of your pie. He baked 1 million new pies to make himself rich. He made us all better through voluntary transactions. Nobody was coerced to give him a nickel. And yet, rich people in business are hated. Far more appealing to them is central planning, government deciding, through force, through coercion, what you can do and what you can't. So, this is why I wrote this book. I based it on the first Obama campaign, where people, Americans, got so excited about, yes, we can. But what Obama meant that to mean was, yes, government can. And government can't. Government fails again and again. Government is such a clumsy instrument. You can say, well, why shouldn't we get smart people? We just get the right people in there. But the incentives are wrong. People say, it's sort of a market. We elect people every 4 years. It's true, but it's only every 4 years. In business, in the nonprofit sector, you got to be making improvements all the time, or your competitor cleans your clock. You can't wait every 4 years. Also, you don't really have a choice every 4 years. It's Tweedledum or Tweedledee. There's not that much difference. Plus, if 51% vote for one guy, then everybody else has to honor what he wants. It's like we had supermarkets, and you voted for meat or fish, and the 51% said meat, nobody could have fish. But in a free market, everybody gets what they want. We should not more of that. It's much better. And the truth is, although government fails, individuals manage to make our lives better in spite of all the obstacles put up by government. The economists talk about economic freedom, and the economic part is important, but that's what causes the prosperity. But so does the other part. The freedom is just as important. I object to big government not just because it makes us poor, because it makes us smaller, it makes us less. When government makes decisions for us, we are less. Government cuts the tendrils of civil society. When we see a poor person, we're less likely to help because we say, New Jersey has a giant welfare bureaucracy. Before the war on poverty began, there were 40,000 mutual aid societies in America. People helping people. They disappeared when Johnson's war on poverty began. The government will do it. Somehow, as the subtitle suggests, despite the obstacles created by government, voluntary networks of private people do manage to stay ahead. The economy has grown faster than the government so far. And voluntarily, we create good things. This university, voluntary creation, clubs, families working toward common goals, charities, churches. Greedy profit enterprise. What's that given us? We take it for granted. Computers, iPhones, flush toilets, air conditioning. Poor people have better and longer lives than kings had a century ago. We take it for granted. We take it for granted when we go to the supermarket. We shouldn't. We should fall on our knees and pray to capitalism. Because think about it, that it's open 24/7. So-called public schools are not open 24/7. It's well lit. It's air conditioned. The aisles are wide. They have on average 30,000 products. They rarely poison us. It's a miracle. The food is unbelievably cheap. When Obamacare began, the Detroit Medical Center complex held a press conference bragging that they were going to be the first big medical center to use barcodes to keep track of patient records. And everybody applauded it. Maybe it was a good thing. I don't know. But supermarkets did that with Coke and Pepsi 40 years ago. The Detroit Medical Center is the first to do it now, 4 years later, because it's not a market. Because third parties dominate healthcare. They $7 out of $8. Either private insurance companies or now mostly government. So they're slow to innovate. They don't need to innovate, and so they don't. Final example. We take it for granted that we could go to a foreign country, stick a piece of plastic in the wall, and cash comes out. And you can give that piece of plastic to a total stranger who doesn't speak your language, and he'll rent you a car for a week. And when you get home, Visa or MasterCard will empty the account and correct the payment. If they don't, they'll scream. But we take it for granted. By contrast, government can't even count votes accurately. But Americans' instinct is to say, government's got to run health care and much more. That's bad thinking. And I'm glad there's finally a libertarian group at Princeton to argue for the values that made America possible. Thanks very much. Hey, Floyd, you can clap. You know, let me kill you. Questions or criticism? Any and all are welcome. And is there a bottle of water or anything? Yes, sir. And why don't you say your name so your neighbors can get to know you?
My name is Shukri, I'm a freshman, but also big fan of a lot of movies. A lot of people don't necessarily have faith in the free market because they say that they don't, they bring up the fact that maybe not all people in the free market have the same transactional costs or don't may not have access to the same information. What do you say in the case where that's not? How do you address that fact?
I don't. It's true. Freedom isn't equal or fair. Some people will have more information. We're all better off now thanks to the internet. But as long as it's not forcibly kept secret, so what? Some will get much richer than others. But the only alternative is a system where everybody stays poor. And eventually the news gets out. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Valerie Wilson. Thank you for coming out today. I'm a Christian, and with respect to your views on healthcare, I was just wondering, in terms of privatized healthcare, I know there was a giant scandal released in Time magazine a few years ago about how hospitals overcharge private companies grossly for medical products, and that helped drive up insurance prices before Obamacare was implemented. So I was wondering about your thoughts on that and how that problem could be corrected.
That problem was a most read Time magazine story written by Stephen Brill, who used to walk his daughter to ballet school. He had a heart attack back and reported on the bizarre costs in hospitals. But those costs can happen only because there's not really a market. Because insurance companies pay, or the government pays, 7 out of $8. And so there's all this complicated gaming of the system in almost all of medicine, except in the few areas where consumers pay themselves. And that's sadly only cosmetic surgery and LASIK eye surgery. And it's hard to compare cosmetic surgery, but LASIK eye surgery is pretty basic. Either you fix the person's eye or you don't. What's happened over the past 30 years? Quality's gone up. They really do a good job. And the prices have gone down. And then something else weird happens. The waiting room is different. You don't wait much. And the doctor gives out his cell phone number and his email address. Do your doctors do that? Bet not. They do that because they have to, because their customers have a choice. And if the customer goes someplace else, he loses money. So he works all day on trying to make his waiting room more appealing and the experience better for patients. And they succeed. The hospital is just trying to trying to do the right thing, and there are good people there who want to help people. But the main focus is sucking as much money as they can out of the insurance companies. And the more complicated it is, the more they can do that. Now, to say to people, well, the answer is to pay for your own health care. People say, are you crazy? That's a job for government. And we have so poisoned people's brains. This started in World War II because we had price controls. We don't want to have inflation, and wars can cause inflation, so they said you can't pay your employees more or you can't raise prices. But people wanted to attract employees, and the only way they could do it is to offer them something extra. And they offered them health insurance. And then the government decided that would be tax deductible. But if you buy it yourself, it's not tax deductible. And this is the sort of the market ever since. Yes, sir.
My name is Joe Bedman. I'm a freshman. Welcome back to Princeton. My question is, what are the sources of rising income inequality, and is it a problem?
The source is freedom. We're not all born equal. Some of us are smarter or luckier than others. Plus, it's a bigger world. Globalization makes a bigger difference. I mean, Michael Jordan is absurdly rich now, not just because he's a great basketball player, but because